Hello guys, this is Oroth and a warm welcome back to my channel. Finally, it's time to share with you a nice monk build that I'm using in dungeons. And this build is revolving around summons and it's super effective. And first of all, we're gonna have a look at the skills I'm using. So for the primary attack, I used Fist of Thunder. For the first skill slot, I'm using Shield of Sen. For the second skill slot, I'm using Mystic Allies. And for the third skill slot, I'm using Mystic Strike. And for the fourth and final skill slot, I'm using Inner Sanctuary. So let's move on and start by looking at the essences I'm using in this build. And first of all, for the helmet slot, I'm using the Neckbreaker. And what it says is that Inner Sanctuary now empowers you and your summons, increasing your damage and attack speed. And at Essence Master level 4, this essence also reduces the cooldown of the Inner Sanctuary by 7.2%. I have been trying all the different sanctuaries, but I choose this essence because this one is the most effective and it's also mobile, which is important in a dungeon. So there are other options that you could try out as well. If you would want to have more damage, I would rather go for the Empathy of Blessing. But this one is the best according to me for dungeons. For the chest slot, I'm using Ease and Clarity. And what it says is that gaining Shield of Sen increases the movement speed of you and your allies by 40% for 4 seconds. And at Essence Master level 4, this essence also reduces the cooldown of Shield of Sen by 3.6%. And I choose to include this essence because this increases my mobility, and this is of course very important in a dungeon setting. The next essence is the shoulder slot, and it is called Feline Defiance. And what it says is that Mystic Strike now also increases your primary attack speed by 30% for 6.4 seconds. And this buff will be up all the time. I also have a lot of reduced cooldown on Mystic Strike, so this was an easy pick. The next essence I'm using is the Pants essence called Lingering Incense. And what it says is that Mystic Strike now summons a spirit ally that rushes forward, dealing damage to the first enemy it hits before unleashing a barrage of attacks. Mystic Strike increased by 18% at Essence Master level 4. And if we see now, Mystic Strikes turns into a summon. So first I can aim where I want to shoot it, and this is very good in an open space because if I'm in a big room and there are a lot of mobs spread out, I can send out the Mystic Strike in each direction like this, and they will help me clear off the mobs very fast. The next essence I'm using is Wind Reaver's Wing. And what it says is that Mystic Allies now summons 2 Spirit Allies of Wind that fire piercing air blades at enemies. And at Essence Master level 4, the damage of Mystic Allies is also increased by 18%. And what's so good about this version of Mystic Allies is that they are ranged. So if I summon them, you can see that they are attacking from afar. And this is also good because all of the other spirit allies, they are not ranged, so if they want to kill off packs in a big room, they have to run between the packs like this, and this makes it a little bit slower. So this is a very good pick. Also, we can see here the Inner Sanctuary buffs the attack speed, and of course it also gives the Vita buff, but I'm going to show the sets I'm using later. The next essence I'm using is Respite's Sigh. And what it says is that it increases the duration of Inner Sanctuary by 30%. And it also gives an extra 9% at Essence Master level 4. And this allows me to have 100% uptime on Inner Sanctuary. The next essence I'm using is Rod of Echoes, which goes into the second main hand slot. And what it says is that Mystic Allies cooldown is decreased by 18.6%. This allows me to more efficiently use the awakenings of my slots on other pieces because the cooldown is capped at 30%. So this is a good essence as well for this build. Finally, for the last offhand slot, I'm using Harsh Truth. And what it does is that it increases the Mystic Strike charges by 1. And at Essence Mastery level 4, it also reduces the cooldown on Mystic Strike by 3.6%. So as you can see now, instead of 3 Mystic Strikes, I have 4. So if I'm in a big room, I can send out 1 into each corner. And then I use the Inner Sanctuary. And they will kill off the mobs very fast. So these are the essences I'm using. Let's move on and start looking at the legendary gems I'm using in this build. And in the helmet slot, I use a rank 8 Bottled Hope. And what it says is that when you use a skill to grant a buff, increase the damage and movement speed of the target by 20.5% for 6 seconds. And this cannot occur more often than once every 20 seconds per target. This also reduces my cooldowns by 4.5%. In the chest slot, I'm using the new 5-star gem, Royal Inconsequence. This is a super strong gem, and it goes into almost every build. And what it says is that dealing damage sends you into a Roiling Rage for 6 seconds, during which your critical hit chance is increased by 36%. And critical hits cause a fire explosion that burns nearby enemies for 36% base damage over 3 seconds. These explosions cannot occur more often than once every 1 second. Roiling Rage cannot trigger more often than once every 20 seconds. And your critical hit chance against burning enemies is increased by 9%. So this is a real monster gem, and critical hit chance is the best source to increase your total damage output. In the shoulder slot, I'm using a rank 10 Blood-Soaked Jade, and this is of course not necessary. But what it says is that it increases all damage you deal by up to 24% while at full life, with the minimum bonus of 12% while at low life. It also increases my movement speed by 10%, which is of course important in dungeons. And additionally, I take 8% decreased damage while below 50% life. Let's also look inside this gem. I can put in some gems to increase the resonance and gain some extra effects. So I can put in a Unity Crystal. I put in a Cutthroat's Grin. I can put in a Lightning Core. And finally, I also have a rank 4 Svensson Haunting I can put inside. And now you can see on the left there, I get some extra offensive stats, which is also nice, of course. In the pants, I'm using Mother's Lament. This is also one of my favorite gems because it increases critical hit chance. And what it says is that when you deal damage, you have a 20% chance of gaining Eternal Disdain, increasing your critical hit chance by 32% for 6 seconds. Cannot occur more often than once every 20 seconds. When Eternal Disdain ends, you release a blood spike towards nearby enemies, dealing 54% base damage to any enemies it hits and also cause them to bleed. And what's also important here is that the Awakening effect reduces the cooldown by 10% on Mystic Strike. Let's also look inside the gem. I can put in a Chain Death, a Follower's Burden, and finally a Power and Command. This is not necessary at all, but it gives me some extra offensive attributes, which is nice. In the first main hand slot, I'm using Echoing Shade. It's at rank 8, and what it says is that your attacks have a 15% chance to summon a Shadow Clone for 17 seconds that attacks nearby enemies with one of your primary attacks. You can have up to 3 Shadow Clones at one time, and their life is increased by 50%. This is one of the strongest gem for a summoner, and at rank 7 you can get 3 clones, but I would recommend everyone to at least get a rank 3, because then you get 2 clones, and this goes into many top builds. In the first offense slot, I'm using Pain Clasp, and what it says is that it increases the damage dealt by 24% to enemies suffering from a continuous damage effect. And when an enemy suffering from continuous damage is within 10 yards, your movement speed is increased by 6%. The Awakening effect also reduces the Inner Sanctuary cooldown by 10%. And this is good because even if I have 100% uptime on Inner Sanctuary, sometimes if I use 2 summons and I use Inner Sanctuary, I want to maybe summon another summon somewhere else, and then it's good if the Inner Sanctuary is ready as soon as possible. If we look in the second main hand slot, I'm using Berserker's Eye. This is one of the absolute best 1-star gems in the game. And what it says is that it increases all damage you deal by 16%, and it also increases the critical hit chance by 2%, but also increases all damage you take by 5%. That negative effect doesn't really matter when it comes to most PvE content, so this is a staple gem to use. And if you look inside, I can also upgrade and get some more offensive attributes. I can put in an Everlasting Torment, and I can put in a Mocking Laughter. It will give me some primary attack damage and some skill damage. Finally, in the second offhand, I'm gonna use Freedom and Devotion. And Freedom and Devotion increases the duration of all of my summons by 24%, and it also increases the damage they do by 3%. Let's also look inside. Here I can put a Trickshot gem, and I can also put a Chain Death. And this gives me some defensive stats that are not necessary. And to have higher duration on the summons is important, because especially the Mystic Strike summons, they have very low duration. So just to prolong them a little bit is nice. And thanks to this gem, I also have 100% uptime on the Mystic allies. So this is a good gem. And those are all the legendary gems I'm using in this build. So let's move on and look at the set pieces. First of all, I'm using 4 pieces of Vitu. And this is a quite easy pick for this build, because what it does is that it increases the duration of all beneficial effects on you or your party members by 30%. And it also increases the target's attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds each time I use a skill to grant a beneficial effect to either myself or a party member. And this of course also works on my summons. So if I summon them and then I use Inner Sanctuary, all of the summons will also attack faster. If we look on the second set I'm using, it's 4-piece Shepherd. And this is of course also a staple for most summon builds. And what it does is that it increases the damage done by my summons by 15%. And it also increases critical hit chance by 3% for each of your summons, up to a maximum of 18%. And this means that I can have 4 summons here, I can have my Mystic Allies, and I can also have 3 clones from Echoing Shade. So often this buff will be at max value, 18% critical hit chance. And what's worth to mention here is that I'm using Mother's Lament and I'm using Royal Inconsequence. They both give a lot of critical hit chance. And when both of these buffs are active, I'm actually capping at 100%. But when they're not active, it's nice to make sure that my critical hit chance is as high as possible. That's why I'm still using the 4-piece Shepherd set. For the Paragon, I'm using Warden, and the reason for this is because it has an effect called Rugged that increases my size by 5%. It's also nice to have combat tricks, which allows me to move freely through enemies. Because in some dungeons you're running in a long corridor with a lot of packs, and if you can't run straight through them, you might sometimes get stuck. In addition to that, the increased size also increases my movement speed, and it also increases the efficiency of all movement speed buffs. And this is also the reason, if we go here to my warband, you can see that I'm in the protect room, I'm not going for damage. And the reason for this is that the protect room has a remnant that also increases my size by 15%. And if you're running dungeons, I would always recommend you to use both Protector Warband Room and the Warden Paragon, because we want to move as fast as possible. And if you're going with the pre-made team, please make sure that everyone has this setup. And also make sure that you have this remnant in your protector warband room, and if you don't have it, you should really go and look for it and purge some depths. Let's also take a look on my familiar, and this familiar is a really amazing one. It's a Brood Talon. It has a very good active skill called Flame Wave, which says Flame Wave arcs forward, dealing 125% damage to and leaving the ground burning, causing 25% damage per second for 6 seconds. So it has some increased burst thanks to this passive active skill. But more importantly, if we look at the passive skills here, this dragon has Lingering Wounds and Tenacity. And Lingering Wounds is the best passive familiar skill in the whole game, because it gives an amazing armor break. And at base value, the legend Lingering Wounds gives 27.5% armor break. But as you can see here, I have maxed Insight at 200, which will give me an extra 9%. And if you combine this with Tenacity, that also reduces the cooldown of the active skill of the familiar, this is a super strong combo. Let's also take a quick look on the magical attributes on my set items. For the necklace, the gloves and the rings, I go for damage done by my summons increased by 10%. This is the maximum roll you can get. And if we look on the feet and on the waist, I look for beneficial effect duration. And on the bracelets here, you can't really get any useful magical attributes for dungeons. So I'm trying to look for 3 sockets or strength. And it's also good with fortitude and willpower. Vitality is not that important at all, because fortitude will increase your armor penetration, that in turn will increase your critical hit damage, while willpower will increase your potency, that increases harmful effect duration. But for this particular build, fortitude and strength is the most important. And strength will of course increase your base damage a little bit. If we look here on the legendary items, I'm also going for beneficial effect duration on the chest and on the pants. And if we look on the pants here, this is the best roll you can get on a magical attribute, 7.5% beneficial effect duration. And this can not happen on an exceptional item. It can only happen on a 2-stat item with only 1 magical attribute. So be very careful when you find new gear, because if you find this combination, you don't want to salvage it. If we look on the helmet, the shoulders, the main hands and the off hands, the main stat I'm looking for is critical hit chance, and my second most favorite magical attribute stat is critical hit damage. But this build would also work quite well with primary attack damage, because primary attack damage also increases the damage done by my summons. Let's also take a look here on my Reforge. This is a standard Reforge I'm using in many builds, and it's especially good if you play any summon builds. I use damage done by your summons increased by 4%, duration of beneficial effects increased by 3%, critical hit damage increased by 3%, skill damage by 2%, and primary attack damage increased by 4%. And it looks the same on all of my items. So let us just try quick here on the dummy to see the output. And remember now that this is not a DPS build. We have downgraded our damage in order to move a lot faster. And so it's dungeon friendly, in other words. But let's still have a look. So as you can see here, the damage output is very good with this build. And this is because I have tried to alter my setup as much as possible towards summons. And I rarely see any monks that utilize the summons properly. So this is a good way to highlight the potential of this class. And it's working super well. And we're of course going to look at some dungeon runs together now, where I also show you how I play the build. First we're going to look at the monastery dungeon, the silent monastery there is. And you can see there that the first thing I do when I enter dungeon is to use Shield of Zen to increase my movement speed. And here I can also prepare all of my summons before a boss can take damage. It usually takes a few seconds for a boss to spawn, and then I want to have all of my summons up. And I can also spam my primary attack to summon all of my clones. What's also very good with Shield of Zen, especially in this dungeon, is that I get no knockbacks. So when I want to activate these pillars, if I don't have Shield of Zen activated, it will often happen that you get knocked back and it interrupts the activation of the pillar. So this is an amazing way to do it as fast as possible. You can also see here, this is why I use Warden. You can see I move very fast with the movement speed from Shield of Zen, but also from the increased size. And I'm not killing the ads, I'm just running straight through them, and this would not be possible without the Warden Paragon and this version of Shield of Zen. And there you could also see that the Shield of Zen gives me a shield, so the activation of that pillar didn't get interrupted even though I took damage. What's also good, if you are with the Barbarian in the party, if he runs away from you, you can always use Shield of Zen to dash to his location to catch up, so you don't fall behind. But of course, the Barbarian can also give you the sprint buff to make you move even faster. So if you go in a pre-made dungeon team, make sure that you are optimizing the movement speed for everybody as much as possible. So it depends on the classes. So let's see here, the main boss, it melts very fast. And yes, this is how I run the Silent Monastery. We can even skip the last phase there. Let us also have a look at Tomb of Fahir. And once again, I'm using Shield of Zen immediately to run as fast as possible to this idol here on the left side. And the best tactic for Tomb of Fahir is usually that I go solo left and then two people go to the right, and then someone else go to the middle to open the door as soon as both idols are dead. And the best is to have like a wizard at the middle door so that he can teleport to the boss to activate the animation as fast as possible. And in general, I often read comments that it's so easy to kill things in dungeons, so it doesn't matter how you build your character. But if you think about it, if you do it correctly, you will save maybe 10 to 30 seconds every dungeon run, because it really is that big of a difference. And yeah, if you can save 10 seconds of every dungeon run, that will add up to a lot in the long run. And if you're able to save 10 seconds on anything you do in the game, that will of course increase your efficiency a lot. So I tend to always try to optimize when I run dungeons, and I also think it's more fun to try to compete with myself and also with my friends to see how fast we can go in a dungeon. And the same goes for Gauntlet and other types of content. It's always fun to perform as good as possible. But let's see here a little bit more about the build. We can see now that I have a lot of summons working at the same time. So even if I'm on one side of the room or on this elevator, for example, the summons will take care of the mobs on the other side. So I really like the summons builds for that reason. And now we're gonna kill this spider guy, and let's see how we perform here. I could probably send the Mystic Strikes into both legs there to kill them off a little bit more at the same time, but it was still a clean kill. So this is how I run Tomb of Fahir. So now we have watched this build in action, and I hope that this was a great way to show the potential of summons for monks. And of course, I've been working a long time to perfect the summon archetype. And if you try out this build, maybe you will not deal as much damage as I do, but remember that these were also solo runs, so if you try this out with a group of people in a party, I'm quite sure that you will have an amazing time. And of course, if you have any questions or if you need any type of help, please let me know in the comments, and I'm gonna try to respond to everyone. And of course, I also hope that you really enjoyed this video. And until next time, I want to wish you a very nice day or a very nice evening wherever you are. And to all of my clan members in Nyx, I would like to say Vork Nyx Sholak Sul. So, bye bye.